I'm Hilary Montgomery, and I'm going to talk about my collection development project on popular feminist nonfiction at the London Public Library. So, first, a little bit about the collection. So, popular feminist nonfiction are books that deal with feminist theories, ideas, and themes in an accessible manner. So, feminist works have been defined as the record of resistance to the patriarchy. So, because every author deals with feminism in a different way, I'm generally looking at it as books that look at furthering women's rights and that highlight gender injustices. The target audience for this collection is everyday people. So these books are meant to entertain and not inform, although some may be a bit more on the scholarly side. So the library. So I chose to do the London Public Library, which has 16 branches across the city with a population of 383,000. Most of them speak English, and most of the population have graduated from high school and have done further education. This is why I thought it was okay to have a little bit more of the scholarly resources mixed in with the accessible ones. So the library highlights community and inclusivity in their mission statement, and the collection policy really looks to increase the formats that are available, so ebooks, audiobooks, and large print, and also increasing the diversity, so who the books are written by, what subjects they are about, and then also focusing on the trends. So with my subject looking at the changes in feminism and the trends in the publishing industry. So collection evaluation method. So I used user-centered evaluation, but this method alone is not enough since I didn't have long-term usage statistics. So I use specific subject support method to determine what books should be in the collection. So looking at which subheading was missing and what had fewer books. And I also looked at a number of book lists from the ALA and online from different feminist resources, compared them to them, as long as looking at classic texts to see what was missing from my collection. So major findings. So I found that there was 82 unique titles and 201 individual books that include different formats and duplicates. So the majority of them were your basic print books. We had 2 large print, 5 ebooks, 6 CD audiobooks, and 3 e-audiobooks. So the format range wasn't very great, so this is something that I wanted to look at expanding. It was also a very recent collection, with 50% being published between 2010 to 2017. The largest content area is in mass media and social conditions with 11 each, followed by politics with 9 titles. And this makes sense because of the trends of feminism. We do see increased talk about mass media, social conditions, and politics within the last decade. It's also majority of American sources, so either published by an American author or about America, and very few titles talked about Canada, and even less talked about Indigenous women. So the deselection process. So I modified Debicki's 20-year policy to be publication and not circulation because I did not have these statistics available. So we looked at publications that were dated past 20 years, and I weeded them unless they had significant usage. No other materials satisfied that subheading, such as Canadian and Indigenous, with so few. I tried not to weed those, even if they were past the 20 years. And if they were considered classics, I tried not to weed them because they're most likely still being used. And then I identified all titles that there was multiple copies of. So I weeded a title or two, depending on how many copies there were, unless the titles had multiple checkouts or multiple holds. And if they satisfied small subheadings, like Canada again, I tried not to weed them, again, depending on what their circulation statistics and the holds were. So the selection process. So I identified some weaknesses that needed to be filled with selecting materials. So I looked at limited formats. So I wanted to expand the audiobooks and the ebooks because that was very limited. I also wanted to expand Canadian context and Aboriginal women and women of color because all of these sections were underrepresented. I also needed to fill in gaps in classics that were missing, and there was also a number of recent publications that were identified through the book list that are really popular right now that the libraries did not have. And I also looked at themes that were underrepresented and missing. So this included rape culture, popular culture, politics and gender, and sex and sexuality. So while some of these titles, they did have some, it could have been filled just because these are really prevalent themes in feminism right now. So as I mentioned before, I use book lists from websites and from the ALA to help with the selection process. So I use book lists from Miss Magazine, the GLBT Roundtable, Bustle Online, Bitch Media, the Amelia Bloomer Project, which is a subsection of the ALA, and I also looked at Book Riot, the book lists on there about feminist nonfiction. So some challenges in this assignment. So I had issues defining popular feminist nonfiction because feminism itself is very difficult to define. But I did find sources with definitions that I think worked pretty well. I also had a difficult time finding books that discuss the Canadian context, especially ones that were recent. That's why I kept the older books that discussed Canada in the collection and noted that it should be reviewed again in a couple years to see if new books could replace these older texts. And in addition, it was very difficult to find books that discussed Aboriginal women. And this is where I went and looked at more of the academic books because there are quite a number of books that I know that I have read that talk about Aboriginal women in a feminist context. So I did pull a couple of those, even though they're not quite as popular or accessible. And finally, here is a list of the references that I used for this presentation and some that I used for my submission. Have a good day.